Okay, so for this layer, or layer 0.5, I guess I could call it, I just want to show you really quickly how I deal with the acrylic paint. So you can do this on a palette, piece of scrap paper, whatever. I'm going to use this little cup. I'm just going to squeeze out some of my acrylic paint into my cup, and I'm going to add a tiny bit of water. Just 1 to 10 sprays of water, not a lot of water, but enough that I can mix this paint and it will just flow a little better than it does right out of the container. You do not have to do this, but I find that it's somewhat helpful to do this. So the consistency of paint that I'm using is it's kind of a melted ice cream consistency. And that's just what I'm trying to use on these pages, just so you see what my paint looks like, more or less. What we're going to do is quickly, you can optionally do this, you do not have to do this, but I like to plan this a tiny bit because it can get a little confusing with all this information. What I want to do is just draw some hearts onto my pages. I'm going to freehand them, and I'm not going to put a lot of concern about where I'm drawing them or how many or how big. I like to have an odd number, and I like to have different sizes, and I like to have different shapes. So some are more elongated, some are smaller, some are bigger, some are more squat and sort of rounded, and none of them are perfectly symmetrical. None of them are perfect. Maybe some of them overlap or touch. Maybe some of them don't. But I'm just drawing these hearts, and I'm drawing them in a way where I can somewhat see where they are on my page. Maybe one more down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. I like odd numbers, and I think we like to look at odd numbers generally. Once I've sort of sketched where these are, I think I'll change the shape of this one a little bit, just extend that a little more. So I've chosen where I want these to sit. Now, what I'm going to do with my paint is paint not the hearts, but paint wherever the hearts are not. That is what I'm covering up. So before you start painting, if you feel like you're covering up too much stuff that you like, maybe carve out a little more space. If there's a part of the color that you really want to see, or part that you really don't want to see, or think about what you're covering and what you're keeping in advance of actually painting it for a moment if you want. So the other thing to think about after you've drawn this is how much are you covering, how much are you not. If there's something you really want to see, make a mental note of that before you start painting. You can go into this spontaneously. It's possible to do that, but it is really helpful if you're planning it to take a moment and just evaluate the parts that you know you still want to show through. And you can make decisions about covering and not covering as you're painting. But I'll show you what this looks like. We're painting in up to our sketched lines where the hearts aren't. And you see that with my slightly watered down paint, something really cool happens, and some of the watercolor will show through. It does not cover 100% of what's underneath it. It just changes the way that paint appears somewhat. Oops. And don't stress if you cover some of your lines or go over your lines a little bit. This is not about being so precise. It's really okay. But you're just painting in everything around the parts of the painting that you have decided to reserve in these heart shapes. So you see that when you paint, you can create forms by covering everything that's around the form rather than painting in the forms themselves. This is a very effective, very fun way to create forms in your work that kind of tricks your brain a little bit and sometimes reveals things that are a little unexpected. It's a little surprising in a fun way. I really like using this strategy in my art journal and just seeing what pops up unexpectedly. So a lot of this requests our, relies on our ability and our willingness to let go of things. And it requests that we let go of things readily and with a willingness to give up certain things in order to get certain things. Really sort of tests that part of our psyche in a nice way, I think. You see, I'm really not painting super cautiously. My brush is just pointed enough to get into small areas. And I can go right up to my line in my drawing, or I can cover my line in my drawing, either way. The more water that I add to my acrylic paint, the more of the watercolor behind it will show through. So that is a way that you can control that. And if you don't feel like your paint has covered enough of the material behind it, you can make a second coat of paint. Just go over it again after your first coat has dried a little bit, and you'll see that the areas of watercolor will disappear more effectively and more significantly behind your painting. But what this slightly watered down, light colored paint will do is give this nice kind of veiled appearance to all the color behind it. All of this color still influences the top layer and informs that top layer. So you'll see a lot of art journaling that is done in layers, successive layers like this. And if you've wondered, like, why do you always see people painting over the stuff that they just painted? Now you can really see the benefit of that it really is a very different image with all of this stuff behind it than if it was just plain white, right? There's a lot more going on because of that. And I might decide not to paint over part of it. There's no rule that says I have to cover all of that background. So that is some decision making that you can make spontaneously, responding to what you see in front of you. So painting is always this relationship between stopping and kind of observing and taking it in, and deciding what to do visually based on what you're seeing and the changes that you're seeing moment to moment. I tend to push things, and my first impulse is to continue covering this entire background, and I think I'm going to actually fight it this time and really not do that. I'm just going to bring it up here, but I'm going to kind of leave this open up at the top a bit. I think those hearts still read appropriately, even without me going over that. But this I might clean up a bit with a second coat, so that becomes a little bit of a stronger edge. And periodically what I'll do is I'll sort of sit back and squint at this, and I'll ask myself, honestly, can I see heart shapes here? If that's a big part of what I want to happen here, do these read? Do I just see the hearts immediately, or do I have to struggle to see them? And which of those possibilities do I want to happen? Now, I want these to be legible as hearts without the text necessarily being legible. So I'm going to use my white paint in layers to really make those edges a little stronger. Just working that paint right up to that edge and cleaning up that edge a little bit. Just having it be sort of a bright, solid white reinforces that idea of it being an edge. So I think these look a little more heart-shaped when I kind of go in and make this a little stronger and a little cleaner in some of these areas. Maybe separate these two out a little bit. Think about spacing. There's all kinds of considerations that you can give some attention. And you can spend as much time or as little time on this as you want. You could use a very small brush and really get detailed. I'm not so inclined to do that. Okay, so I'm going to put my brush in some water, call that paint part done, and this dries pretty quickly. We're going to let it dry, and then optionally, you do not have to, but you can if you want. You can come back in and do some additional doodling and enhancements on top of this matte surface paint. So let's let this dry, come back, do a couple of things, and call it a day.